can see the lovely terrain here with the farms separated by borders of beautiful palms. And it's so calm and peaceful up here. Largely untouched by the modern world, the landscape looks very much the same as it would have centuries ago. Rising amid this rustic scene are the beautiful spires of Bagan. Ancient Bagan was dubbed the city of 1,000 temples, the capital of a mighty empire that ruled for over 4 centuries. Bagan was first established around the year 850, and it remained a small principality for 200 years. But that all changed with the birth of a legendary king. In 1014, a boy called Minso was born to Bagan's ruler and one of his wives. It was a great blessing because he only had 2 stepsons, offspring of the former king he had overthrown. When the brothers grew into men, they overthrew the king and banished him to live out his days as a monk. But they saw Minso as a brother, until one day one of the brothers took Minso's mother as queen. Minso was so enraged that he gathered an army in rebellion. In single combat, he defeated his stepbrother, who drowned in the river. And so, Minso was crowned King Anorata. It was the beginning of a mighty reign that would expand Bagan's territory over most of modern Myanmar to lay the foundations for the nation today. While Myanmar's urban centers have begun to modernize, time in Bagan has stood pretty still. Traditional pots have been in everyday use for centuries. While these are so beautiful, they have such simple and elegant shapes. The pots made here are famous for keeping drinking water cool. Oh, this is too low. I think I just have a scoop. When it's baked, the clay will become porous, which lowers the temperature of the water inside. Tintin Tet has been helping her family business since the age of 15. And then here, and you have to have real control on your fingertips to keep the shape very even, which I obviously don't have. I'm making a mess of this. I'm making it wider. I'm supposed to make a water pot, but I think I'm making a wobbly flower pot. Disaster. It's amazing to think that water pots are still in huge demand here. But this is why. Covering over 54,000 square kilometers, Myanmar's heartland sees less than 80 centimeters of rainfall a year. It's a third of Singapore and less than some of Africa's savannas. I'm in Tuyen Tetso, a mountain about half an hour just outside Bagan. This area is so dry that it was once called the parched land. And managing water was crucial for the growth of the Bagan Empire. Archaeologist Scott McRae is taking me to a site only discovered in 2013. Oh my God. It's so huge and deep. Carved out of the sandstone stands an 11th century reservoir, part of a network of 8 tanks and 2 canals that carried water to the city of Bagan. Its walls hold clues about the value of what was stored in here. I know this pattern so well, but I never imagined I would see it carved on the side of a water tank. I've seen it on temple carvings, I've seen it on batik, elaborate labyrinth patterns set with swastikas.
Some people think you follow it towards enlightenment.
And what about the hole in the middle?
We'll put a pole in it to measure water heights at different times of the year.
The tank can hold as much water as an Olympic pool, and at the end is a symbolic tribute.
It depicts Buddha sitting on a throne made of a snake. So where all the water that would overflow out of the tank would pass beyond to Bagan.
Spiritual.
And what about the hole in the middle? They'll put a pole in it to measure water heights at different times of the year.
The tank can hold as much water as an Olympic pool, and at the end is a symbolic tribute.
It depicts Buddha sitting on a throne made of a snake. So where all the water that would overflow out of the tank would pass beyond to Bagan.
Fine water shows just how precious this resource was.
To think how people thought of drinking water and religion all together is something very moving and very relevant even.
Shows just how precious this resource was.
To think how people thought of drinking water and religion all together is something very moving and very relevant even today.
That's led to a lasting mystery. Who stole Burma's royal ruby, and where is it now? When British soldiers conquered Burma in 1885, they gave the last king hours to pack. Many of his treasures, heirlooms from a millennium of monarchy, were seized and sent to the UK, but the most precious and enormous ruby simply disappeared and was never seen again.
That had not changed greatly between the days of Marco Polo and the Second Burma War, and might have slept in the Middle Ages for a century more if it had not proved a convenient spot for a railway terminus.
Chowktada is actually Kata, a town in northern Myanmar, then called Burma, where George Orwell lived and worked in the mid-1920s. He made the town the setting for his first book, Burmese Days. It's thought this old building was Orwell's home, empty for the past 16 years as the country languished under isolating junta rule. It's now in danger of falling into disrepair. That's why a group of local artists is trying to save it and want it turned into a museum.
Asia, and here's Myanmar. Now let's go, shall we? Monsoon swept and soaked in tropical warmth. The land of Myanmar has been inhabited for eons, and in those long ago times, the ancient populace did what the ancients of many lands did, paint pictures in caves, mostly of the animals that they hunted, like bison and deer. As the centuries slinked on by, people learned to work with metals and to grow rice, which to this day remains the country's most important crop. Big changes arrived in the 100s BC, when speakers of the Tibeto-Burman language group migrated into the region. Buddhism was introduced from India and steadily spread and became the land's majority religion, which it still is. Things got shaken up rather roughly in the mid-8th century, when the kingdom of Nanchao in southern China invaded Myanmar. Amidst the chaos of these times, the Burma people entered the land, otherwise known as the Burmese or Myanmars, who are today the biggest ethnic group in the country. The Burma established the Bagan kingdom, which ascended in power and influence under Anorata, who conquered and unified and reformed and fended off the Khmer Empire of Cambodia. Over the next 2 centuries, the kingdom flourished and many thousands of temples were assembled in the glittering capital of Bagan, including this magnificent building, constructed during the reign of Chansita. Then, as always happens, the state began to weaken and decay. Money troubles, internal strife, and external threats, including a calamitous Mongol invasion that decisively terminated the dynasty. Myanmar fractured into smaller states, one of which amazingly defeated a second Mongol invasion. Anyway, the days of division lasted until the 1500s, when a certain king came along. He went out and conquered himself an empire, and though he ended up a miserable drunk who was assassinated, he was succeeded by the brilliant and highly capable Bina, who conquered even more, carving out a sizable state covering a large swathe of Southeast Asia, which, following an old historical precedent, began to decline after its greatest leader's death. Myanmar would not be united again until the rise of the Gombao dynasty, founded by this guy here, who spent most of his reign at war, conquering and crushing rebellions, taking merciless steps to ensure the Mon-speaking peoples of the south would never pose a threat to Burmese rule again. The following years saw more war, beating Siam in this conflict, thwarting Qing dynasty China's attempt to conquer them by winning this war here, and then there was more war with Siam. Burmese expansion into northeast India rankled the British, who were themselves entrenched in that country, and not pleased with the prospect of local conquering competitors. So there was war. And then there was another. But then there was another war. Britain won all three and conquered Burma, and the Burmese were naturally very upset. Rebellions were brutally crushed, and there were railways, and agriculture was amped up, and migrant workers from India were brought in, who laboured for less pay, and thus displaced many Burmese. Then the British themselves were displaced, when the Japanese invaded during World War II, a devastating time that saw many, many thousands of Burmese killed. Finally, in 1948, the country achieved independence and began to rebuild, and Burmese diplomat Wu Ta became Secretary General of the UN. Meanwhile, trouble was looming like a storm cloud over Burma. Things were not going so well. Crime was high, and the government was not popular. So there was a military coup that installed a single-party dictatorship. Of course there was. The military proved even more hopeless at running things. Poverty increased, and there were protests, and then, in 1988, a very big protest. Instead of getting democracy, though, a different dictatorship took over. In 1989, the country's name was changed to Myanmar, and in 1990, elections were held in which the party of the highly popular Aung San Suu Kyi, daughter of a hero of Burmese independence, easily won. So, the dictatorship tore up the results and placed her under house arrest. In 2007, Myanmar erupted in the Saffron Revolution, with protesting monks on the front line. Before reforms could be ratified, however, the worst recorded natural disaster in Myanmar's history struck, a monstrous cyclone that claimed over 130,000 lives. In 2011, the government began implementing some reformatory changes. Aung San Suu Kyi was released, and in 2015, her party won the elections, and she became the country's leader. But then Myanmar returned to the headlines for the wrong reasons again, with the Rohingya genocide. The Rohingya are Muslims who for decades have faced persecution by Buddhist nationalists and the government itself. Violence and killings caused over 1 million Rohingya to flee their homes as refugees, most going to neighbouring Bangladesh. Then, in 2021, Aung San Suu Kyi was arrested again, and surprise, the military took control of the country again. So that's the topsy-turvy tale of what was once called Burma, but now is called Myanmar, even though the people are still called Burmese, and whose capital has changed to Naypyidaw from Yangon, which used to be called Rangoon. Myanmar, with a medium level of human development, faces a number of high hurdles to improvement, and we wish this beautiful, pagoda-rich country a speedy stepping up into better times and better governance. But till then,
Let's talk about the war in Myanmar. Let's talk about the war in Myanmar. Opposition forces are trying to overthrow the military, which has been in power for decades, and it looks like they may have the edge. All kinds of people have joined the fight, from established armed groups to students and activists who want democracy.
The military, if you like, is on the ropes.
Is losing significant land, civilian territories.
Myanmar is now at the verge of state failure.
Millions of people have already been displaced. There are now warnings of famine and reports of all sorts of atrocities being committed. So what's behind the fighting? And could the military regime really be about to fall? Myanmar, which used to be called Burma, is in Southeast Asia, sandwiched between all these countries. And to understand what's going on there now, we need a quick backstory. For decades, a repressive military regime has been in charge, ruling over a very diverse country made up of more than 100 ethnic groups. Myanmar was heavily sanctioned and isolated from the world. It was seen as a kind of pariah state. But from about 2011, things started shifting and led to a period that some people call Myanmar's experiment with democracy. The ruling generals agreed to share power with a civilian government. There were elections in 2015, and a party called the National League for Democracy, or NLD, won. It was led by Aung San Suu Kyi, who'd been the face of the opposition for decades and had spent almost 15 years under house arrest. In 2020, the NLD won again, by a landslide. But the military disputed the result. They staged a coup to take back power. Aung San Suu Kyi was detained and then sent to prison, although it's not clear where she's being held right now. What came next led to a full-scale civil war that is still going on.
Myanmar's 10-year journey to democracy appears to be over.
The military takeover has sparked the biggest demonstrations seen in Myanmar in more than a decade.
A stark warning from the UN Special Envoy on Myanmar. Quote, a bloodbath is imminent.
Security forces shot more than 100 people dead.
Peaceful demonstrations were responded to with massive violence by the military. This violence made them even more determined to get the military out of politics.
The people of Myanmar were not prepared to turn back the clock. Since then, the people have built up their armed resistance to the military, and the situation now in Myanmar is unprecedented.
After 4 years of fighting, the map of Myanmar now looks like this. The military regime has lost a lot of territory, especially in the last year. It now only has full control of 21% of the country, according to a BBC investigation, but that includes the capital Naypyidaw and other big cities. The rest is controlled by a range of different anti-military groups. You can see there are lots of them, but they roughly fall into two main categories. You've got the ethnic armed organizations. These are groups that represent different ethnic minorities, and they've been fighting against the military for more rights, autonomy, even independence for a long time.
These wars go back 60 years. It's nothing new. There have been periods of greater or lesser violence in these wars, but they have been continuous since the military became the dominant power in Myanmar in 1962.
Every minority in Burma has their own stories to tell you how much they are suffering. So that is the main driving force for these minorities. They feel that we must protect ourselves.
As well as the ethnic armed groups, the other main category on the anti-military side are the resistance groups that emerged in response to the 2021 coup, when many of the protesters decided to pick up weapons with the goal of ending military rule and restoring democracy. You had all sorts of volunteers joining the fight: students, lawyers, medics, and a lot of them have been trained by those ethnic armed groups in secret jungle camps. And over time, they've become a more effective and better equipped fighting force.
A lot of Myanmar citizens, they've been donating money to the resistance movement. Eventually, they grew exponentially.
One of the things that's made a huge difference in the last 6 months is weapons the pro-democracy forces have seized from military bases they've overrun.
The main resistance group are the People's Defense Forces, or PDF. These are the areas they control. The PDF are essentially the boots on the ground for a rival opposition government that was set up after the coup, called the National Unity Government. Now, while the PDF have been pretty effective, it's really the ethnic groups that have been making the difference.
Much as the NUG would like to claim this military success of the resistance as its own, what's happening on the battlefield in Myanmar is primarily being driven by the ethnic armed groups.
For example, one group, known as the Arakan Army, is now in full control of the border with Bangladesh after pushing the military out. In this video, you can see soldiers waving white flags and surrendering. There are lots of reports of how the military have been struggling to get enough people to fight for them.
There is a massive number of surrenders to the People's Revolution side.
We know that morale is very low, that they have introduced conscription and are literally kidnapping young men to fight in the military.
Sending them to the front line, using as a human shield. This is the biggest crime going on in Burma.
So you've got this situation where the military, which used to be all-powerful, is really under pressure. Could the regime actually fall, though? Well, plenty of people are predicting that it's only a matter of time.
This illegal coup attempt by the military, now we can see for sure it has failed. One of the very reasons is because of the very unwavering determination and resilience of the Myanmar people. Especially the young generations are absolutely resolute in their fight to end this military operation once and for all.
We should not be surprised if sudden and dramatic change comes to Myanmar. Maybe I wouldn't predict it, but we shouldn't be surprised when it happens, or if it happens.
A lot would still need to happen for the regime to finally go. One big advantage the military has is air power.
And it uses these weapons brutally and basically adopts a scorched earth policy to seek to obliterate the villages, towns, and even cities that it has lost in the fighting on the ground.
The military also still controls the major cities. The PDF and ethnic groups would have to stage a pretty major offensive to take those cities. But there are big questions about whether they're all united enough to make that happen. Keep in mind, the ethnic armed groups are more focused on achieving autonomy in their own regions. Some are even fighting each other.
The ethnic armed groups do understand that if this current military is left in power in the centre, they will never be at peace. But whether that translates into a willingness to expend enormous resources and lose a huge number of lives by marching on the central cities, that's another question entirely.
So what about pressure from other countries that could shift the balance of power? Well, just as Myanmar isn't really in the news much, there's not a great deal of diplomatic attention focused on it either. The main player here is China, but Beijing seems to be hedging its bets.
China is the only country that has been putting significant effort to address the issue. But on the other hand, that was mainly for protecting its own interest, but rather than resolving the issue in Myanmar.
China traditionally has tried to play all sides. It has been a supporter and armour of the military, but it's also armed most of the ethnic groups, directly and indirectly. I think China's major concern is to ensure that whoever wins the war in Myanmar, China is on that side.
And while the world's attention is elsewhere, the people of Myanmar are suffering a desperate humanitarian and human rights crisis, and it's getting worse. Parts of Myanmar are cut off with no internet, so it's hard to get information out. But there are reports of atrocities being committed by both the military and some of the armed groups. In Rakhine State, for example, civilians from an ethnic minority called the Rohingya are reportedly being killed and displaced by the military and the Arakan Army, which is the main ethnic armed group there. You've probably heard of the Rohingya, a mostly Muslim minority who've been persecuted for years. 750,000 fled to Bangladesh in 2017 to escape what the UN have called genocidal violence by the military. Aside from the reports of attacks on the Rohingya, the broader humanitarian situation in Rakhine is particularly bad. The UN is warning of famine there. But people all across Myanmar need help. 20 million, according to the UN, and nowhere near enough aid is getting in. 15 million people don't have enough to eat, while cyclones and floods have destroyed huge areas of farmland.
And that's really heavily impacted food security.
Now that the resistance controls so much of the country, including all of the major crossing points to Bangladesh, India, China, Laos and Thailand, there is no excuse not to provide massive humanitarian relief by land across those land borders. And this is a failure of the international system and of Myanmar's neighbours not to be undertaking this kind of humanitarian relief.
Start Here is all about explaining the news. Watch our recent video.
People were at Changi Airport to welcome the 18-member SCDF team who returned home after their 11-day rescue operation in Myanmar. Most of them were family members, and about 100 Burmese residents in Singapore turned up. The team was sent to facilitate Operation Lionheart after an earthquake measuring 7.7 on the Richter scale killed thousands. Aslam Shah was at Terminal 3's arrival hall.
A hero's welcome for these men and women. While most have ties of kinship, others are connected through humanity. It was emotional for these Burmese in Singapore who are away from their loved ones during the nation's crisis.
Singapore is our second home, so we are thankful to the Singapore government and also the Lion Hearts. We are very respect to all the Lion Heart and the Singapore.
Because now we are suffering, the whole country is suffering because of coup, a lot of separatity. And the second, attack for us. So I'm very thankful for all your team because you all support for us. Thank you very much.
For the officers, it was a family reunion after 11 days. Some had to leave young children behind who see their parents in a new light.
Proud because he has helped many people. I am proud. Happy.
The officers include regulars and national servicemen who had to leave Singapore at a few hours' notice. Over half are Muslims, and for many of them, it was their first time spending Hari Raya away from loved ones.
We felt very sad without having him for our Raya, but I'm happy that he's actually there doing humanitarian work in Myanmar. I mean, sad but proud of what he's doing while he was absent. Yeah,
It's a little bit somber because he's abroad and initially the network wasn't really good, the communication is disrupted. I feel proud and happy that he's back, but above all, I feel grateful for his safety.
We think of the thousands of people in Myanmar who are affected, but you went serious risks because of the aftershocks, the nature of the place, the kind of terrain, and of course the buildings.
The 18-member team includes the largest number of national servicemen in Operation Lionheart with 13. Now, even though they are back home, reunited with their families, they hope the aid and supplies left behind, along with their show of support, will continue to help Myanmar in their road to recovery.
Media 不需要代理的歌。
The death toll from the 7.7 earthquake in Myanmar has risen to over 3,500 people, and the number's still rising as more than 5,000 people are injured and hundreds more missing. Some experts warn the death toll could even reach to over 10,000. The rescue efforts are ongoing, but the ongoing civil war in Myanmar, severe weather and aftershocks, some reaching to 6.7 magnitude, making the rescue operation more difficult.
看到没有，横平竖直的。现在呢，也跟别的也在里面。别问谁说他了，
In this video, we'll uncover the full story. What happened, how aftershocks, war, and even severe weather are making things worse. And shocks, war, and even severe weather are making things worse. And what hope, if any? How aftershocks, war, and even severe weather are making things worse. And what hope, if any, lies ahead.
We are on the path to democracy, that we're democratizing at a very, very fast rate. It's nothing like that at all. If anybody takes the trouble to read the Constitution, they will be able to understand why we cannot become a genuine democratic society with such a constitution in place.
Amid all the positive developments that we've seen in the last couple of years in your country, there are also some very troubling ones, and I'm thinking particularly of this wave of ethnic violence that has targeted Burma's Muslim community. What is your view of what's been happening there? Some people are calling it ethnic cleansing.
No, it's not ethnic cleansing. It's a new problem, and yet it's linked to old problems as well. I would like to make the point that there are many moderate Muslims in Burma who have been well integrated into our society, but these problems arose last year. And I think this is due to fear on both sides. And this is what the world needs to understand, that the fear is not just on the side of the Muslims, but on the side of the Buddhists as well.
You would accept, wouldn't you, that the vast majority of the victims of the violence have been Muslims? There is evidence that they have been systematically targeted.
Muslims have been targeted, but also Buddhists have been subjected to violence. But there's fear on both sides, and this is what is leading to all these troubles. And we would like the world to understand that the reaction of the Buddhists is also based on fear. I think will accept that there's a perception that Muslim power, global Muslim power, is very great. And certainly that is the perception in many parts of the world and in our country too. So
When
this
you
is
talk
fear.
about fear on both sides, you would accept, though, that the scale of the suffering is not equal on both sides. There are something like 140,000 Burmese Muslims displaced from their homes and living in camps. They're the ones who are bearing the brunt of this violence.
I think there are many Buddhists who have also left the country for various reasons, and there are many Buddhists who are in refugee camps for various reasons. You will find them in Thailand, very many of them, and you will find them scattered all over the world. This is a result of our sufferings under a dictatorial regime, and I think if you live under a dictatorship for many years, people don't learn to trust one another. A dictatorship generates a climate of distrust.
But people have to
and
take
suspicion.
responsibility for their actions.
Of course,
don't
this
they?
is what the government has to do to make sure that there's accountability. This
And
is
it
why.
doesn't seem as if the government is making people accountable at the moment. I'm thinking particularly of the Buddhist monk Wiratu, who used to be in prison but was then let out, and now he's a very popular, influential figure. He goes around spouting what really is hate speech, talking about Muslims being like dogs and blaming them for stealing Burma's women and things like that. Do you condemn that kind of hate speech?
I condemn hate of any kind, and you're right when you say that the government has not been playing a responsible part in this. And I would very much like to urge you and others to ask the government what their policy is and what they're trying to do or what they're doing or not doing to improve the situation. We have said from the very beginning that rule of law is essential. It's imperative, because before people can sit down and sort out the differences, they have to feel safe. And if they think that they're going to be killed in their beds, they're not going to talk about harmony or learning to understand one another. So I would say that instead of asking us, the members of the opposition, what we feel about it, what we intend to do about it, because you must see that we are not in a position to do the sort of things that a government must do. You should ask the present government of Burma what their policy is, how they are going about this problem, how they intend to deal with it.
Personally, what have been the difficult things to adjust to in the course of the last couple of years for you? Your life has changed immeasurably.
Quite frankly, I don't think that I'm adjusting to anything very extraordinary. New situations, but no more extraordinary than the ones that I've had to face over the last 25 years.
But picking up the pieces of family relationships with friends, having contact that you were denied for so long.
Real friends, you can always pick up at any time. The friends that are not so